Hey, everyone. So today, as the meeting invite would have told you, we're going over utilizing a tool called OWASP ZAP to easily automate your penetration test, which will utilize any automation that you currently have, any Selenium-based automation. So this is intended to be an introductory sort of course in how to get from nothing to working regular automated penetration tests, have some tangible results and some stuff that you can really build upon. If you look in the Zoom meeting in the lower right, there's a raised hand button. What I'd like to ask from people in the group here, could you raise your hand if there's any manner of automated or manual penetration tests that are being run regularly in your environment, like more than just once off? Does anyone have that?
I recently ran the OWASP ZAP on my system.
Excellent.
So, yeah, but not automated. Yes.
Yeah, not automated on that. It's very easy to automate, and you got past some of the hard parts, so we'll get into that right here. Okay. Is anybody using a third-party contractor or auditor to do your security testing? I see a couple of hands. Okay, so there's one on there. So for an awful lot of the other people, I assume they're either a little shy or they don't want to disclose it, but there's probably, doesn't sound like there's a whole lot of security going on testing in a lot of environments, and this is a good place for you to get started on it. So let's start off with what is ZAP. So it's called the Zed Attack Proxy, and what it is an easy to use web app pen test tool. This is just simple, doesn't mean it's not very effective. It is a very extensible tool, so you can do what you need to do with it in a wide variety of means. So you're able to add scans to it, you're able to develop your own tools if you need to, and utilize it as a framework for very thorough app pen testing. But the tools that it comes with will be a good way to get you started in a lot of ways. And it's open source, it's always free, so don't have to worry about licenses or getting any resources in mind before you use it. At the time when I first made this slide, it was under Creative Commons license. It may be under another license now. You can have a look at it, but at any rate, it is free to use and to edit as you need for your needs. And it is maintained by OWASP, which is the Open Web App Security Project. This is a open source group maintained by a large number of security professionals. You can be sure that they'll be up on latest security trends and is very trustworthy. There is an OWASP group in Austin, and I think they did have one remote meeting recently, but if you have a look at, thought I had them on here. Austin. If you just search OWASP Austin, you can see about their regular meetings. They're doing Zoom online meetings. And if we get back to regular meetings, they're at the National Instrument Building, South 35. So getting back to the presentation here. So some of the features of ZAP is, as the name indicates, it's an intercepting proxy. So if you used any sort of tool that allows you to open up a browser and direct it through, like for instance, a number of load testing tools like NeoLoad, or there's been a good number of tools that will try to write some functional tests for you. You'll be somewhat familiar, but it's just simple as typically using the browser to demonstrate to the system what sort of requests and traffic is regularly sent to it. And it has a number of scanners that it can run from the tool that's installed as extension, so they can added, removed, customized and adjusted for whatever you need. It has a very, very good reporting system in it that it builds up and tallies what it finds and can, at any time you request it, deliver a report, and we'll go into a little bit more about that in a second. And an important distinction when you're dealing with parts of the test is the passive scanning, which is just simply sniffing, looking at cookies, at headers, and learning about the product as you use it. And then there's the more active scanners, which is going to play back and try and figure out what it does. So let's have a look. This is an example that's on OWASP Zap's website, and you can have a kind of look at, but it's going to have different risk levels after every report, and it's going to list them always from highest to lowest. And it doesn't just say, hey, I found a cross-site scripting somewhere in the product. It's going to say, I found cross-site scripting. Here's a description of why that's a bad thing, and going to then tell you exactly where it was found. So it was a post to this endpoint at this URL on this parameter. It injected this value into that. And if you've done any testing before, you might be familiar with this saying, hey, I'm encoding a table in a script for a simple alert to say, this said this on there. And if I'm able to do this, I might be able to do some other types of scripts and run arbitrary or random code to really make things a mess. So this is not something you want to be seeing in your product. So starting with it, just if you're going to be using Zap to do a pen test, you're going to connect a browser, a proxy through Zap, and explore the product. So this is just like your normal functional test. You're going to log in, you go into exercise functionality, make sure it can see parameters, cookies, slides, and stuff like that. And it's going to learn about your product. And then you're going to do what's called a spider scan. This is another more somewhat passive. It doesn't do a whole ton, but what it does is allows it to learn about more pages. What a spider scan is going to do for a given URL, it's going to search for a whole bunch of extra endpoints. If it finds patterns like everything ends in a number, or it's going to look for stuff like robots.txt, panes called admin, help, just about anything. It's a pretty long and extensive list. I know you can add more to it to find what you want, but it's a good way of discovering pages you may not even be aware are exposed. And then I put if time here, you're going to be running the active scanner. That's going to be trying to do more injections, buffer overflows, the real nasty stuff. It's gonna find the real problems, like the higher rated issues on it. But an active scanner on that is going to take some time. Depends on a lot of factors: how many issues it finds, how many endpoints, what the response time of your server is. I typically see it take take between 2 hours. I've seen a couple that have taken over 18 hours to run. So that is going to be tying up some resources while that is running. And it's probably not the sort of thing you want to run every single time. And I probably wouldn't recommend running that on production or anything like that with any sort of regularity, or really make sure you know what you're doing before you run that on production. And I can show you some examples why afterwards. And if lots of times you can run manual tests, and this is probably something I'll get to in a bit, but it's something you're going to have to eventually learn how to do anyway. And there is on OWASP website a guide to manual testing. I actually have a hardbound copy of the book. It's very nice and useful, and it's on my desk in the office where I can't get to it right now. But it's going to walk you through how to do an awful lot of things like the cross-site scripting exploit, how to inject those parameters and work with it. So here's an example of what we're going to go through. how we get a test like that and how we automate that. And I'm going to use an example at my company, Accruent. And to give you a little background, it's a large software company in the resource management, planning, and monitoring spaces. So you have a lease, you have equipment, you have sites, whatever. If it's about managing those sorts of things, we have a lot of different software that'll assist people in that. And it's a large company that has had a lot of acquisitions in the last few years. There's over 30 products at Accruent. And they have broadly similar purposes, but we have all sorts of different software stacks, security standards, and teams have various different levels. Some have had professional security people on them, and some have never actually tried to work in that space before. So what led to the development of this framework was we wanted to have the ability to run our own penetration testing, but we wanted to, it has to work in a variety of different areas, be able to have work off, if it's off central resources, it has to be able to scale, and it has to be usable enough for anybody to pick it up and start testing with it. So when we're running our automation, some of the resources that we use in addition to Zap is Jenkins, which is an automation server that initiates, directs tests. I'm sure you all are familiar with things like that, or TeamCity or another similar sort of test, so I won't go into that. We use Zumba, which is a GUI API testing framework. It's built upon Selenium library and robot framework and has some extra bells and whistles in it. If the sort of thing is very interesting to you, I suggest you Google Accruent Zumba, and there's a link to the open source that you can get it on. One of the initial creators of that is actually in the chat. So hi Keith, how you doing? And Rancher, which provides Kubernetes as a service. So I won't go into the details on it, but just understand that there's a dedicated Kubernetes cluster that we use to build testing resources, like servers that have Zap on them for use whenever we're running these tests. So having a quick look through here, every job that we're running on this involves Jenkins making a Zap pod. So Jenkins master will tell to the Jenkins node, send a command to the kube controller, build the pod here, and then order it to target at the SUT. Now, the Jenkins node, in addition to running, sending commands to kube controller to build and control the Zap pod in Kubernetes, will also execute the automated tests. So our Selenium tests will run, and what they will be is proxied through Zap so that Zap can pick it up and do its passive scanning at that point. Note the secret volume is present in kube controller, and this has SSL certificates, which you're going to need to set up if you're using HTTPS. And if you're not using HTTPS on your servers, you got some serious security problems already in place, and potentially performance issues too, but that's another story. As it runs through that, after the passive run is used, API commands are set to the Zap pod. And from there, it's going to say, hey, run the spider, run the active tests, and when it's done, what report did you get? And it pulls that back into the Jenkins master, and the report is then available. So I'm going to go through when the person actually wants to run it, they're going to see a Jenkins page, much like, almost exactly like this in every case, where you can see the different sorts of run the Selenium, passive test, run spider, run active. This part here is in case of flaky tests. So sometimes whatever Selenium test, they may not be sure that everything's going to pass. So that's just to make sure they don't want to mark the test as failure in the case that happens. and target job would be another Selenium job that actually runs the guiding Selenium tests on there. And exactly as I was talking about it before, it's going to build a pod, run it through, and this is how that is all automated. So a lot of this is going to be just like if you manually do it, you're just running your Kubernetes jobs to do it. Let's gonna jump out of this real quick. So something that a lot of people ask is, how do I change Kubernetes jobs so that it will work with the OWASP ZAP? And the change that you need to do is actually, in most cases, extremely slight on it. Typically, with whatever means that you're using, you're going to have something where you instantiate the browser and call your Chrome driver, whatever you're going to be doing to run your tests. And usually you should have, in almost all cases, have some means of adding arguments to it. And what you definitely want to be doing is adding arguments to point it towards the OWASP ZAP server to tell it to proxy through that server while it's running. In this case, because that all runs through a Jenkins job, that's passed as a parameter, the actual proxy value that we use. So that's, I mean, with a simple change like that, and then you run your tests through, you should be able to get it. So you set up OWASP ZAP, you proxy your tests through it. You will have to do any sort of certificate work that you need to do to make sure that that works. And then you should be able to really just rock and roll, run your tests and see it. All the other parts about setting up with Kubernetes and setting up this pods, that's because of the large scale and number of tests that we need to run in all cases on them. So let me see if I can start sharing from this slide. Thought there was a way to do it. Probably is. That's okay. We'll just cut through. There's not a whole lot. All right. So I gave a little preamble of what I think it should be used for, but let me tell you a little bit about stuff that I've seen and what I think you really should be using the product for. I think it's excellent to have CI/CD pen tests with this. So as you have your continuous integration, continuous delivery, you have your pushes, your daily builds, regressions, whatever you're doing, you're going to be running your functional tests a lot lately. And this gives you an option to, just for a little bit more overhead, get some security checks when you're running on them. So you can find these issues early and correct them as soon as possible. Now, I did tell you that the active test can take a substantial amount of time, so that's probably not something you're definitely going to be wanting to do every single build or certainly every push, but it might be something that you definitely want to have in your regression pipeline. Make sure you don't find any issues before you're pushing to prod on it. And perhaps with more resource management on it, it would be definitely possible if you're doing some sort of daily build or more regular release to get that sort of test in every day, or perhaps even more often. If you are, and a couple people are using third-party auditors, testers, you really got to start looking at getting your own tests into the system. And this is good for several reasons, not just because they might miss something. They're often pretty thorough people and do a good job, but you should know your own product hopefully better than anybody that you hired just with the interest of doing testing and trying to find their way in. An awful lot of this is reliant on knowing where things are in the product, certain things you can work with, and where certain points of manipulation might be able to use. So using your skills as automation engineers and as testers, you might have more insight than auditors might have into it. Another reason is security testing is going to be a thing even with auditors that you're going to have to get into at some point yourself, simply just to be able to test and confirm things that they find, and then to be able to confirm if the issue is resolved when they fix it. Also, this is really the only way to really build skill sets and things in general is to start doing them, at least in my experience. Some people may disagree on that one, but you really have to get your feet wet, and the only way to get anything rolling on this is to start doing it yourself. And this ZAP itself is a base for more complex and thorough security tests. Once you get this rolling out and you start seeing about, might start learning more about what security concerns may exist in your product, this is something that you can really build off of and take from it. So let's say you're running through and you start finding some holes in your issues. It says you have cross-site security scripting on a lot of your parameters, and it can get right through and write whatever it wants to your SQL at any time. What's the steps you're taking? First thing you're going to want to do is confirm the issues manually. I'll tell you, with pen testing, and particularly when you're in a more automated system, you're going to find more false positives than you might find in other sorts of testing. And there's a good number of reasons for it. Some cases, there may be corner cases where it may indicate an issue or may not. And you're going to have, in a lot of areas, multiple levels of security. And when that occurs, you may hit something but find out it's not really an issue when you're done. And one thing you want to have, ideally you have this in place already, but I would encourage you to try and start learning how to do the scans and like have something to show people before you start asking for buy-in. But you should look up and make sure you have in place what's called a security intake process. And what it's going to do is tell you, all right, when stuff like this is found, what are the steps, exactly what has to happen to make sure that this is corrected. So you should have all the way from discovery of a security issue to resolution, a full set of steps that you follow through. And you should be following up regularly, track down known false positives, issues in flight, possible regressions. Should be treating it in a lot of ways like other bugs that you find and other issues in the automation. If something occurs and you find a vulnerability, you should assume at some point that it could very well happen again. So you should be checking that regularly in some manner of regression path. Very important topic. What is ZAP not very useful for? It's not the be-all and end-all of security tests. I've seen a lot of people with ZAP run what's more of a general package scan without walking them through the product and just say, all right, we ran scan, we're secure now. No, it's unfortunately not that simple, but it's, always a good step to get it rolling. Be aware of customer requests, contractual requirements. A lot of you are probably aware of it, but a lot of customers, it's not uncommon for them to require from all their vendors who supply software to have third-party security auditing tests run anyway. So you may have to be paying out for that regardless. You're going to want to also look networks and system security testing. I've always carefully said ZAP is an application penetration tool. It's going to be focused on code quality and areas where it can penetrate through there. And we can look through some of the steps that it does, but it's not going to be looking at certificates, encryption, system level stuff that's really important still, but this is more focusing on, okay, how do we improve the code to make it more secure? And there might be extensions that make it do more of that, but it's not in the default product. And continue to learn as a team about securing your product. Like I said, this is security is everybody's job, just like quality is on it, maybe even more so. There should not be one person who's the security guy who all security decisions run through. Everybody really should be thinking about it. And I think as QA people and automation, however we deem ourselves, this really should be an area we take an interest in doing more than what we do. All right, we might have a demo in a little bit, but I want to take some time here and see who has questions. Oh, we got some in chat here. I see a half raised hand. Sorry. Yo, you use Burp Suite, Eric. That's awesome. And some people are running things quality and like bug bounty programs. Tell me a little bit more about bug bounties, how that's working out for you.
Sorry. Yeah, so if our product's open source, we have people outside the company that are actually doing testing and submitting security bugs that they've found.
Excellent.
I have paid as much as $10,000 for really bad security bugs.
So that's an interesting sort of contracting method that you have there.
Yeah. But I'd like to do some of this testing in-house and not, not have people find those in the first place.
Hey, if I was you, I would ask for at least partial bounty payment on anything you prevent.
Yep.
So
sounds good.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I've seen a lot of companies, larger companies particularly, that have an internal security team, and of course, ideally, everybody is ground up security knowledgeable to some degree. But yeah, bug bounty programs like HackerOne and similar things to that, I see that becoming more common.
That's a good idea, certainly with a lot of products. Of course, you have to weigh out that whatever people find, they think that the bounty is worth more than any potential benefits that they could utilize. So any questions about setting up automation or how that process works? I think it's pretty straightforward, but I've seen people confused by it before. All right, well, I'm going to show you a quick little demo on how we can run a quick test on it against a little dummy program I came up with. All right. You all see OWASP Zap now? Oop, dropped it. There we go. And I think that's being shared. Is that right?
Yes.
And I think I need to get chat up.
Yeah, we can see it.
Yes, we can.
Excellent, thank you. So their system under test is going to be this little computer's database. This is I used for developing automation tests. I think I actually crimped it off of Gatling.io, and it's a pretty simple program, so it's good for devising an awful lot of tests. So within OWASP Zap here, when you start it, you have a couple of quick start means on it. What we're going to start off with is in the manual explore, and we can launch a browser to bring it up. Now, I'm launching it in an embedded browser here, and that is going to just, when it instantiates, is going to run it with the proxy set through the system. Other ways that you can use it, and it's important to understand, if the options menu would open quickly. You have local proxies that you can set on it, and you can set that to any value. So whatever system you have, as long as it can reach here, you just tell it to proxy through here, and it'll have the same effect of what we are doing here. Just for ease and like a quick setup test, we're going to see this. We have some controls that we can do on the side, and we actually already have a couple of alerts. It's just picking up on the base navigation here. So if we go through our normal sort of CRUD operations on it, We can edit, add, good computer. And forget the date on it. Well, we should put in all the fields actually. 2002, 1, 1, 2004, 1. And be sure to use the filter to find all, say, apples. Yeah, that did not actually pick anything. That's okay. I think for it. As you can see, it'll be aware of some fields as we go on here. Now, while this was working, this is, by the way, a program is a lot easier to use with 2 monitors. We're going to see everything that it picked up. So it's going to pick up an awful lot of Google stuff. And if you're using a general proxy, it's going to pick up everything on your system. And we can see in the history some alerts that it's picking up as it goes through. So it's not a very well-developed system, so it's getting a lot of low ones, but it's not very in-depth, so we actually won't pick up too much on big items. But we can see requests, responses, and also we get some notices about any reports that are going on. So to utilize them, like we do when we're automated, you can use things through pull-down menus, but you can also see the API on here. And what you can do is control it right through a browser on here by default, which is very handy. So we can see like the current reports as well into the field. And we see we got a couple of medium alerts, some lows and informationals as well. X-frame option headers not included. If you don't have that in place, that's always going to get hit by that. And this provides some information about it, but Googling clickjacking or X-frame options is going to teach you an awful lot about why that may be a potential issue. So this is on here as well. And it's mostly looking at some caches. It's going to be unhappy about cache settings and cross-site, anti-cross-site reference tokens that it's going to use so that people might man in the middle or jack your session. And this is informational that it's getting some system information on the Unix operating system it's able to see. Actually, it's getting that from Google API. So double check your URL. That sounds like a Google problem, at least not something we're going to worry about a whole lot here. And some Chrome related stuff. So it's just seeing stuff through the browser use that it's working on. So it's not really an issue. Now for the next scans that we can see, select what we want to work on. And then we're going to attack, and Spider's more of a passive scan than an actual attack, but we'll go ahead and get that started. It runs through typically pretty quick, and you can see it's having a look at a whole bunch of different endpoints about what it learned. And for example, anything with a little spider on it. So it got the style sheets page, and we showed it like 1 or 2 different endpoints, but it's trying a whole bunch at random on there. And this is also one of the things I like to tell people, be a little bit careful with it. It's going to try a lot of parameters in different sort of orders that it's doing. So if we look back at it here, so just back off to the page front here. It's trying the delete button in several cases, and if we may have cleared some of them out on there, you're going to see it's going to be trying a few names before with injection style names. See if we got it on here. We can see, but it may attempt to repeat what you did before, but with other parameters. So that's why I recommend you running it more in a test environment until you get a little bit more familiar with how it acts in your environment. You can run it on subsections and different areas, but let's go ahead and we're going to start a whole active scan. I ran this before, and actually this program probably isn't just complex enough for an awful lot of things for it to try to inject through or pick up, but we can have a look at what's in your normal sort of active scan by default. So it's going to try to force path traversal, see if it can jump through to different areas on it. You can see it's getting a whole lot of 400s, which is something you would expect to see on it. Can try to add files to it. If it can do that sort of inclusion at any point, it's an issue. Whole bunch of different cross-site scriptings like I was telling you about before, a whole bunch of different injections to different backends or operating systems, and several more items on there. Some buffer overflow if it wants to try and do some sort of a possible heartbleed type thing or get some information, or parameter tampering to cause issues into the system itself, such as do a little chaos monkey type stuff and cause some issues that you might see in the back end on it. So we might pick up a couple more items, but unfortunately this was not on there. I probably should have had a look at Pet Store, a more deliberately made vulnerable tool on it. Let's keep running. Yes.
I have a quick question. So you're running this against that site you have, which doesn't require any authentication or anything like that to make the API calls.
Correct.
So how would this be set up with, like
when you do have authentication or something like that?
Yeah.
Typically, you'll be able to log in and do your test like normal, and it will be able to follow in steps like that. In older systems, you had to tell it this specifically, here's how you log into the system. But we found that it's usually smart enough to follow the steps or to reuse session information on it. So if you're running the test like right after you did it and you still have valid session info in it, or I mean, if that's not working out, one step that you can do is try and take logouts out of your functional tests and just leave it logged in at the end, so it can try and run all these tricks again. Normally, we see it just simply work in those cases. You might want to check and make sure that it's able to, get past your login page when you're running it to see how that works out. Thank you. That's a very good question. All right. Well, we're just going to be watching this run scan here. This is the end of the little demo that we have here. Does anyone else have any questions?
Sure. So, when you actually identify a security vulnerability, what is the process of addressing it for your team? Do you submit a tier ticket, or how do you go about that? How do you prioritize them?
It depends.
Who determines?
Yeah, it depends on the team that we have on there. And so in our company, we do have a dedicated security team, and they have set up with all the product teams do have the process that I mentioned to the security intake process. So we have some means that we can put into them, and that'll deal with the issue creation. It'll ping the appropriate product manager, and they'll discuss severity of the issue and what fixes are going to be taken at that point. So typically it depends. Obviously stuff that we found there is not an immediate threat, but in case of injection or a customer complaint or something, they should have the authority to adjust sprints to ensure that the issue gets resolved.
Cool.
Of course, it's a good idea to learn a few things. I might be able to demonstrate in a nutshell how you can do some of the things. So if we do what you want to do is set breakpoints. So what we'll do is set one anytime we go to the computers page on there, which should be every page. Whenever you do, it's going to have an interruption. and show you the request that you attempted to send through. And you'll be able to see all the header information and a lot of different parts of it. So we can step, continue through and all that, see our response that we get back. And what we can do is edit the response that we want to set out. So for instance, this is a little less dramatic because it won't work in this case, because I don't think it has something that it can talk to. We can see table, script, alert, one table script on it. In the parameter field here, we can actually edit this to, oops. Utilize or attempt it. So typically when it's automating the tests and the commands that you're seeing going through there, it's going to be trying a whole bunch of stuff like this on every parameter field it can find to attempt to reproduce that. So we continue and get a bad request. So it's actually picking up, hey, that's not making much sense in what it's doing.
So that means it keys off of whether the request is successful or not?
Yeah, so if it was successful, it would be able to see a new dialog box that came up that said alert. So it would get a specific feedback on it. That's why I like using alert for these confirmations. So picking up a few skills and learning how these things work would help an awful lot in identifying if the issue's there. And once you can test it reliably, you'll be able to show something to development that you'll be able to test again afterwards and see if you can recreate. And it's kind of a pretty good demo. We've had to do that a few times for some issues that were found as they were corrected. Let's see. So rollout process that I've seen in an awful lot of teams is they're able to get a proof of concept done. I mean, in a matter of days where they're able to run it. And then figuring out what kind of run schedule and what sort of cadence they want to do in the run can come in another sprint or some point at there, but it's a good idea to have something you can show. This is the report that we're getting on it, and this is how much effort it would take in the future to get that running. All right. Let's have a look at the OWASP ZAP page. You just have a look at it. You can download and have this ready to go very quickly. And they actually have a couple of their own videos that can give you a little bit more rounding of the education, but I think I really got you started on a lot of the core concepts on here. Alrighty. Does anyone have any other questions?
Sure. You know, when a crew acquires a new company, for example,
Yes.
You know, as far as understanding and wrapping a security process around that, or like, you know, applying something like this to it, is it per project, per team? Like, how does that go about? I'm interested in like, the business process of it.
Oh, sure. So at a new acquisition, there's a whole lot of steps that are being done. So as far as the automation team is concerned in these, it's going to depend on their needs and what processes they have existent. So I said we use this framework when we're doing our functional test. This is not universally true because if a product has a mature team that's developed a mature project in another framework on there, we're not going to insist that they rewrite everything on us to match the company on it. So it's going to depend on frameworks, what they're doing. So it's a question of in a lot of cases, I think we see relative rarity of in-house application penetration testing in a lot of areas. So this is something that we can look to introduce on it. And fortunately, it's relatively easy to, so the example we did was in utilizing robot framework and Zumba. But for instance, I've had it working with Ruby Water and whatever means that they really want to work with. We'll see them able to introduce these sorts of tests really quick. And so this question of, in a lot of cases, what they run, what their needs are, how accepting they are of getting into more automation processes. Fortunately, the answer is usually pretty high, especially when we have like a dedicated team say, okay, we'll help you really get yourself running on this. You'll have to own it eventually, but we'll get you on your feet. And one thing that's a little bit different is security is not really a case of you don't think you need to do security. Well, we better have a very good reason for that, as obviously you're only as secure as your weakest link. So this is something that, like, not just in products that are receiving the most development work, is something that we're kind of looping back, and products that have been more static for a while, to get these sort of tests in place to see if there's anything that would cause issues.
Very cool.
Mm-hmm. How's your testing been going, Evan? You're actually the one who got me rolling on some of this stuff in the first place.
I have to say, overall, it's well.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm on a greenfield project at the moment,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm working mostly on the Kubernetes side, and like as of lately, Terraform piece. So in terms of testing, it's really a matter of like testing the Terraform, you know, and the infrastructure that we create. So that's what I'm up to lately. And that's for a production server we're building out at the moment. But I do want to get back into the OWASP space and just more of the security space. But in terms of security, I'd have to say next week I'll probably be working on just security hardening our Kubernetes cluster for production.
For sure.
So running Nmap against, you know, nodes and understanding open ports and these kinds of things. Nothing quite at the application level yet, but it's all a work in progress.
As it is, man. As it is on there.
Oh yeah.
We're all turning into DevOps guys, slowly but surely, it seems. So OWASP has several containers available online. You can grab right off Docker Hub to work with. There is there's a number of other builds. I'd recommend having a look at the Bear build if you can, just to minimize resource utilization. And if you encounter issues with this, try and do a more a larger sort of stable build or something like that. But this is able, as you can see, receive some updates, not a whole ton. An awful lot of things you have to watch is the extensions library to see if there's anything you want to add into there. And at that point, if you're not using a default image in your tests, you may want to be looking into a managing your own system. This is assuming that you're using Kubernetes or Docker to run it, which is not necessary on it. It's considered necessary in my environment just because a large number of different tests and large volume of tests that go through. We want to make sure we're utilizing the resources as best as we can. And one thing I'll tell you about static Docker and when running it, this can end up using an awful lot of memory in disk space as the session information and files can grow, especially if you're doing a long, very involved test. It's going to get bigger and bigger. And so to keep it actually as stable as possible, we like, you know, having a new instance of it running whenever we want and using the reports as the only thing that we have in the end. there. So a lot of different means. Does anybody intend to try and do some OWASP testing after this? I'd recommend having a look at it and getting your download done. It's the sort of thing that can be run relatively quickly.